Remove the obstructing defilements and clear away all your taints. Listen to the perfect wisdom of the gentle Buddhas, taught for the weal of the world, for heroic spirits intended. So those 4 lines, that verse, is a very well-known verse that begins a text called the Ratnaguna Samshayagata. And the Ratnaguna Samshayagata is one sutra in a class of sutras called the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. So these sutras were, they started to appear perhaps about 500 years after the Buddha attained to parinirvana. But they purport to be the word of the Buddha. In fact, the sort of legend is that the Buddha spoke these words that are written down in these sutras, but that people at that time were not ready to hear the wisdom of these teachings, the perfect wisdom of these teachings. And the legend is that the Buddha hid them, and they were guarded by great sea serpents called nagas. They're like serpents, but they're also like dragons. And they live under the sea, or some nagas do, not all. And the nagas guarded the perfection of wisdom until a man called Nagarjuna, and Nagarjuna has Naga in his name. So you think of the serpent in the depth of the ocean, and there's something, I guess, about the ocean that is symbolic, isn't it, of the unconscious. And the serpents are protecting this treasure of the perfection of wisdom. And serpents in Buddhism, the nagas, are really auspicious. They're really auspicious beings. They appear in different contexts, but they're sort of magical beings, often associated with energy, and of course with wisdom. Anyway, these nagas, the king of the nagas, is particularly guarding these treasures of the perfection of wisdom, and then Nagarjuna discovers them and teaches them. So at least that's the legend behind these texts. And some of you will be familiar with the Heart Sutra that we often recite in the Sevenfold Puja. And the Heart Sutra is one short Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. It's a famous Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. I'm told that in Japan, in Japanese Zen monasteries, it's chanted very often. It'll probably be chanted every day, probably several times a day. And the full name of it is the Prajnaparamita Hridaya Sutra. So it's the heart of the perfection of wisdom. It's getting right to the heart of it. And we encourage, in Triratna, we encourage you to learn that by heart. In the Sevenfold Puja, we recite it in unison. Partly because it's very beautiful to do that, but also it's helpful to learn it by heart. Partly because it's trying to speak to the unconscious. It is trying to speak to the depths in you. Maybe not the unconscious in the Western sort of psychoanalytic sense, but certainly the very essence of consciousness. It's trying to speak to that aspect of our being. To the conscious, particularly to the rational mind, it will make no sense whatsoever. It'll make no sense. It's not meant to. The Perfection of Wisdom Sutras are not addressing the conscious mind, they're not trying to be conceptual teachings. In fact, what they're doing is trying to undercut all concepts and get to the very, very essence of the Buddha's teaching. The tradition of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras seems to have gone on for about 500 years, although I'm not a Buddhist scholar, so I could be wrong about that. And some of them became very long indeed. Some of these sutras became very, very long, like 100,000 verses rather than just a couple of pages, which is what the Heart Sutra fits on. And then they went through a phase of becoming very, very short. So the Heart Sutra belongs to that phase where they became shorter. And they became very, very short indeed. And there's one Perfection of Wisdom Sutra which is just one syllable long. So that's the easy one to remember by heart. And the syllable is not but just And in Sanskrit is a negative prefix, meaning not. It negates whatever it prefaces. So it means not. And in a way, that particular one-syllable Perfection of Wisdom Sutra is saying it's not what you think. The Perfection of Wisdom, whatever you think it is, it's not that. And if you think you've got it, you haven't. If you think you understand the Dharma, you don't. Yeah? That's what it's saying. And it's meant to sort of shake, well, I guess one thing that it could do is shake us out of complacency, of thinking that we've got it. It can shake us out of our egotism, actually, because it's very, we're all egotistical this side of enlightenment, I include myself. But people who are practicing the Dharma, particularly if you've been practicing for some years, egotism can get really subtle and slippery and even sort of wear a spiritual gloss. I don't know if you can sort of imagine what that feels like or looks like, but it's like you can kid yourself that you're really spiritually wise, particularly if, like me, you give lots of Dharma talks. I could talk about the Perfection of Wisdom quite a lot, and if I'm not careful, I could start to kid myself that I know what I'm talking about. So it's quite helpful to have a reminder that says something like not. No, you haven't got it. Yeah, you haven't got it. The thing is that not can sometimes be unhelpful. It can also be unhelpful because not, that negative, no, if we're, particularly if we're a sort of rational, skeptical materialist, if we're of that bent, not can lead to a certain sort of nihilism, that there isn't anything, there isn't really anything, there is nothing, there's a big nothing at the end of our lives, and at the heart of life, it's meaningless. If we're not careful, the Perfection of Wisdom, which is rigorously negating all concepts, including Buddhist concepts, in fact, particularly Buddhist concepts, it negates them, it says no. If we're not careful, we could then think, well, there's nothing. Yeah? So I then find it very interesting that this particular Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, called the Ratnaguna Samchayagata, starts with the words, call forth as much as you can of love, of respect, and of faith. It's sort of saying, look, you're not ready yet to hear the Perfection of Wisdom. Not in a useful way. You're not ready unless your heart is full of love, of respect, and of faith. A heart that isn't full of love will be closed. It's not that you can just have a sort of absence of love and still be, somehow neutral. Either the heart is open to metta or it's closed. And to the extent that our hearts are closed, we won't be able to hear the wisdom of the Buddhas. Or we can hear it in the literal sense, but it won't mean anything. And if we're not careful, it will even be negative and counterproductive in the way that I was just talking about. So love, metta, is a critical, essential foundation for wisdom to arise. But actually it goes deeper than that. Because if you do start to glimpse what the perfection of wisdom is talking about, if you start to glimpse the nature of reality unveiled from our delusions, if you start to see things as they are, then it's said that what should arise, what it feels like, there'll be a conceptual component, in a sense, but the feeling, the sort of emotional, the affective component of wisdom will be love. That's what it will feel like. Bhante Sangharakshita in this book, Wisdom Beyond Words, which is, I think, a masterpiece of his teaching, in this book, and I'll come to the cover of this book and to the figure on the shrine in a moment. In this book, Wisdom Beyond Words, he says that in a sense, metta is prajna. Metta is wisdom, in a sense. I think that's really important to remember, because we can start to think of wisdom as a rather cool, kind of even cerebral quality, some sort of thing that is we're going to have to study hard for, get our heads around, and then we'll perhaps one day be wise. The perfection of wisdom isn't like that. The perfection of wisdom is saying you're closer to it when you're in touch with love, when there's metta, and when particularly there's, in the fifth stage of the metta bhavana, if it's been going well, you can sometimes feel just free-flowing, unconditional kindness and well-wishing, and anybody that you bring to mind, everybody that you bring to mind, is just the recipient of this well-wishing. Have you had glimpses of that sort of experience? If you haven't, keep a sort of half an eye out for it. You can't force it to arise, but you can at least know that it's possible. When you're in touch with that sort of metta, in a sense you're closer to wisdom. There's more to wisdom than that, because actually one could be really kind and still not very wise. That too is possible. But metta at its height, fullness, is also wise. Yeah. Actually, when it's conjoined with wisdom, it's not referred to just as ordinary metta. It's called the great love, Maha Maitri. Maha Maitri is the great love, which is enlightened metta. It's metta arising from wisdom. But then this first verse says, call forth as much as you can of love and of respect. So why do you think respect is such a essential quality? And I think the sutra is really, it's not an accident that it then says respect. Firstly, it's love, but then respect. What do you think the importance of respect is? Another word for respect, this is the translation that there is in this book, but another word for respect is reverence. or another translation of the word is reverence. It's called Gaurava in Sanskrit, and it can be translated as respect, but also reverence, this upward-looking gaze. So why do you think that's so important for the attainment, for the realization of wisdom? Yeah, Peter.
Because it's not self-referential.
Ah, yes. Yes. Can you say any more?
So when you respect or show reversion to someone, so you kind of let yourself out of the way and be surrounded to something higher, something more perfect than the current self, what we call as self. So that's probably why it's not self-referential.
That's right, yeah. So it's quite interesting that it's not self-referential if there's genuine reverence. At its best, of course, our sense of self can creep into everything, can't it? It's like sand that gets in your shoes. It's like everywhere. So you could be bowing to the shrine and still be thinking, do I look good bowing to the shrine? I hope they're watching, or something like that. Self-reference can get everywhere. But ideally, a pure sense of reverence wouldn't be self-referential. And if we're free of self-reference, then the mind is more attuned to the way things are. We're more attuned to reality doesn't have self-referential aspects to it. That's part of our delusion. So we're more free of that delusion. But I don't think it's. You said something else, Peter. It's not just that the reverence would free us from self-reference. It's also looking higher. It's looking upwards to someone, somebody, something that embodies more wisdom than we have. It's looking up. Reverence is a quality of of supreme receptivity. It's an openness to learning something that I don't already know, and surrendering in the best sense of the word to the wisdom of somebody that may know more. Without that sort of receptivity, it might not be a total surrender, but without some degree of receptivity, we don't learn. And that applies to just ordinary, everyday learning. We're never going to learn anything from somebody unless we're receptive, unless we kind of want to learn. So when it comes to the most esoteric wisdom that there is, the heart of the nature of reality, we're going to have to be really receptive, supremely receptive. So that's partly what's been got at. A sense that there is something to learn. Do you see that's also connected with this sense of the sutra saying you haven't got it? Because if you think you have, you've already become self-referential. Yeah? Always be wary of anybody who claims that they've got it. So if somebody goes around saying, I'm enlightened, you kind of think, it's good to be skeptical anyway around people like that. Yeah? Because there's a sort of contradiction at work. Yeah? And there's a sort of contradiction. So yes, of love, of respect, and of faith, of Shraddha. So why Shraddha? We're getting, in a way, love leads to respect, or reverence leads to Shraddha, faith. So why is faith important if we're going to wake up to wisdom? In a way, they could be seen as slightly opposite, like they're opposite. So why is faith so important for the arising of wisdom? Shraddha for prajna.
It's kind of like a journey, isn't it? You know, you're kind of setting out and you don't know if you're going to get to the end. So
Yes.
you have to have a bit of faith.
Yes. You have to have a bit of faith in order to set out for a destination that you don't even really know. You don't know what it's like. In fact, you're told you don't know what it's like. And you're sort of taking it on trust that it exists at all. So you're not completely sure that there's any real wisdom to gain. And yet, you're told, the teachings of the Buddha says, commit your life to this and you will gain wisdom, you will wake up. And through the wisdom, you will be liberated. So if we're going to commit ourselves to that journey, as you say, we're going to have some degree of confidence that the teaching of the Buddha is true. Without that, it's not going to... I don't think we're going to be able to stay the course, particularly if it gets tough. Yeah. There's another reason I think Shraddha is very, very important. I can remember once on a solitary retreat, I sort of had a glimpse, or perhaps a glimpse of reality, whatever it is. You can't really, all the words are inadequate, but anyway, a glimpse of something deeper. And for a while, all my bearings fell away. All the things I thought I knew fell away, including all the teachings of the Dharma that I thought I understood. I sort of realised I didn't, or not really. I sort of understood them at one level and then not at another. And it was very, very disconcerting. Really, really disconcerting. Particularly because I was on my own. Particularly because I was on solitary retreat. Fortunately, I was in Mallorca and it was very sunny and beautiful. So that helps, doesn't it? If you're feeling disconcerted, I recommend Mallorca for doing it. Not on the beach. I wasn't on the beach. Mallorca also has mountains. I was relatively isolated. But what I found really, really helpful was that the Heart Sutra kept coming to mind. And I was so glad that I had learnt it by heart. And all I could say is, it's true. All I could say is, it's true. It was more true than I had bargained for. So much more true that it shook me, in a way, to the core. But I was very, very glad that I also had, not just the Heart Sutra, but a devotional practice. I had a shrine that I was doing puja to and meditating in front of. And the shrine started to become more and more vivid to me. And I had a book of teachings called The Songs of Milarepa, and that was sort of on my shrine, and the whole retreat started to just become magical in that often I would just open the book at random and read one of Milarepa's teachings, and it was exactly what I needed to hear. It was as if it was written for me. Lots and lots of magical things just started to happen. And that was, in a way, a deepening of Shraddha. And without that, I don't know if I could have handled the glimpse I had. It would have been too destabilizing. Because it wasn't just a glimpse, then all sorts of weird things started to happen energically in my body. Anyway, I won't go into all of that, but it's quite, if you get a glimpse of reality, it will shake you up. Yeah, it won't be comfortable. It won't be comfortable. You will need faith that it's a really positive thing, that it can lead to liberation, that it doesn't have to then be frightening. Yeah. Maybe that's why it says that this teaching is for heroic spirits intended. For heroic spirits intended. We're going to have courage, determination, commitment, and in a way an attitude that we will sort of as fearlessly as we can search for the truth and be open to whatever the truth reveals itself to be, without preconceptions. That's a heroic quality, to go into the dark, into the unknown, and be prepared to, literally die, if for the truth. That's what the Buddha did when he took a great vow under the Bodhi tree to attain enlightenment or to die trying. So Buddhism puts a lot of emphasis on that heroic spirit. So then, I could say more about that verse, but I want to say, in a way, come back to reverence and love. A few weeks ago I was talking about a bodhisattva called Manjudosha, who is an embodiment of the perfection of wisdom. He's an embodiment of wisdom. And he holds to his heart, with his left hand actually, he holds to his heart a text, and it's the text of one of these Perfection of Wisdom sutras. He's holding that, that wisdom is at his heart. But it's very, very interesting, this imaginative development of Buddhist figures, because what happens in the tradition is that text turns into a goddess, turns into a bodhisattva called Prajnaparamita, and it's Prajnaparamita that you see on the shrine. And she's in female form. She, as it were, is the personification of that book. So the book, which is the essence of enlightened wisdom, itself becomes personified. Yeah? And when it's personified, it's in female form, and she's, as Suryagupta said, sometimes called the Great Mother. The Great Mother. She's golden in form. All the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, the colours are really important, but one thing that we sometimes forget to say is that they're made of light. They're not substantial. They're not sort of substantial corporeal beings. They're made of light. So it's golden light. She's made of golden light and clad in jewels and silks that are extremely beautiful, resplendent, also made of light. She wears this crown with jewels of the colours of the 5 Buddhas, the 5 archetypal Buddhas, some of whom we've heard about. It's like she's adorned with the wisdom of all the Buddhas, just in her crown. And sometimes the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, are they're young. Like Manjudosha is one of the things that's emphasised with Manjudosha, as with quite a lot of the other Bodhisattvas, is that they're young. So Manjudosha is a youthful prince. In the Indian tradition, people attained to physical beauty and perfection at the age of 16. So all these Bodhisattva figures are said to be 16, which is of course twice 8, which is a magical number. But Prajnaparamita, she's not young, she's a mature woman. She's probably in the prime of her life, but mature. And that's because she's the mother. She's the mother, not just in the ordinary sense, she's the mother of all the Buddhas. She's said to be the mother of all the Buddhas. And that's because, well, why is that? Why would the perfection of wisdom embodied in female form as a mother be called the mother of all the Buddhas? This golden, resplendent, beautiful, mysterious figure. A book who's become a figure, a golden Buddha. Why the mother of all the Buddhas? So what does a mother mean? I mean, signify archetypally. And you have this in different religious traditions, the Divine Mother.
Leader?
Say that again? Leader, yeah. Say more. In what sense is she a leader?
Our perception of our mother
Yeah.
is leader.
Yeah. Well, she's...
The like compassion, love,
Yes.
many things
Yeah.
are behind not only the leadership as
Yeah.
as a goal, it's like compassion, love.
Love and compassion are very, very strongly associated, aren't they, with mothers. And leader in the sense of, in a way, our mother is probably our first teacher. Without her, we wouldn't survive. But also we wouldn't learn. So there is, yes, love and compassion. So that just love and compassion I find interesting, because remember, she's an embodiment of the perfection of wisdom. So that again, what we've got is you cannot separate love and compassion. You cannot separate wisdom from love and compassion. To do that is okay for teaching purposes. It's okay for conceptual purposes. But if you think that in reality compassion is any different from wisdom, then you haven't got it. Yeah, you haven't got it. So that's very interesting, I think. Wisdom is also often a feminine quality in Buddhism. It is in the Greek tradition. So Sophia would be the personification of wisdom in Greece. And in Buddhism, prajna, the very word, is a feminine word. And sometimes when wisdom and compassion are conjoined, when they're archetypally represented, wisdom is seen as the archetypally feminine aspect and compassion as the archetypally masculine aspect, which is a bit different, isn't it, to perhaps a Western way of thinking it. Remember, we're talking archetypes, so we're not talking literally, it's not about gender in the way that you might think of it. It's not about real men and women. We're talking about archetypal qualities. So why would prajna be represented in female form? What is it archetypally that's important?
She's literally a creator, isn't she? Like
Yes.
wisdom that creates
Yes.
that possibility.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, she's literally a creator. So she gives birth to the Buddhas, and it's the perfection of wisdom that causes the birth of a Buddha. Yeah. So remember that Shakyamuni Buddha, as it were, he was born under the Bodhi tree. Before then, he was an ordinary man called Siddhartha, or at least we think he might have been called Siddhartha. His birth as a Buddha happened at the attainment of enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. So birth in that spiritual, metaphorical sense arises with enlightenment with the attainment of wisdom. And because she's the birth of, she's the mother of all the Buddhas, there's a sense there that all the Buddhas attain to enlightenment in the same way, by awakening to wisdom. The Heart Sutra says this: all Buddhas of past and present, Buddhas of future time. Then what does it say?
Using this prajna wisdom.
Using this prajna wisdom. Dwelling in this prajna wisdom. It's using this prajna wisdom. It is. They dwell in it as well. Using this prajna wisdom, attain to full and perfect enlightenment. Thank you for somebody remembering this thing that I'm talking about, learning by heart. It's easier when you start from the beginning, isn't it? It's very difficult. Anyway, the point is that there's only one, as it were, way of reaching enlightenment. There's lots and lots of paths and teachings in Buddhism, but in the end, we will have to, all of us, if we're going to attain to Buddhahood, as it were, attain to the same wisdom. And she personifies the wisdom. So she is, in that sense, giving birth to all the Buddhas. Yeah? And she's also embodying, I think, love and compassion. But also, why I think this is really important is that, so I was saying earlier that reverence and shraddha, garva and shraddha, reverence and faith, are really, really important prerequisites for us if we're going to even get a glimpse of this perfection of wisdom. And it's much, much harder to reverence an abstract concept. So we could talk in abstract concepts. I could give you a very sort of dry, abstract discourse about what the perfection of wisdom is pointing to, about non-self and all the rest of it. You could probably talk about it yourselves, most of you. But it's hard to revere and worship a concept. Yeah, it sort of goes against the grain of our sensibility. But a personified, beautiful, golden being made of light is easier for us to revere, to open the heart to. She's beautiful. She's alluring. She's enchanting. You want to gaze upon her. She's also well, in a way, if you encounter her, you will also encounter her love. So it's not a dry wisdom. It's full of kindness, which is very, very attractive. No matter how much we think we're attracted to sort of concepts, when it comes to it, it's very difficult to commit our lives to them. Whereas a beautiful golden figure, personified wisdom, is much easier to open our hearts to. Personification is really, really important. Sometimes in our sophisticated Western culture, actually it's over-sophisticated. It's rather hideously sophisticated. In our Western culture, we can kind of think that this is personification of concepts, worshipping deities is somehow naive superstition. And of course it can be, but it doesn't have to be. Approached in an intelligent way, it's actually a doorway to liberation. All these images are doorways. We've been talking about a different image each week, and they're doorways into enlightenment. Approached with faith and with intelligence. You don't have to leave your reason behind. They open up another dimension of mind, of consciousness. in a way that concepts will very seldom do. It's not impossible. Some people do just hear a conceptual teaching. Even in the Buddha's time, there's stories of people just waking up to the truth just by hearing a conceptual teaching. But it's rare. And if, well, in the Buddha's time, if that did happen, I can almost guarantee that those people would have already had hearts that were full of love and faith. Yeah? Whereas our hearts, in comparison, in our culture, can be rather dry and shriveled. Maybe I should just speak for myself, but that's what modern Western culture tends to do, particularly living in a busy urban environment like we do. She holds in her hand, in this image, she's holding her hands in the gesture of teaching the Dharma, turning the wheel of the Dharma. So she's also teaching. She's not just an embodiment of wisdom, she's communicating wisdom. Her whole being is about communicating wisdom, about helping us to wake up. And then in this image, in the fingertips of both hands, there are stalks of lotus flowers that are flowering by her shoulders, and on each lotus there's a book. And of course the books are the perfection of wisdom texts. Yeah? So she's still an embodiment of this text, these texts, these precious, precious jewelled texts. If you go to the British Museum, you can see one of these perfection of wisdom texts. I've sometimes been there just to look at the books. These, you know how in the Christian tradition you can get beautifully enamelled Bibles and religious texts that are jewelled and beautifully gilded and illustrated. There's something about the book as an object of worship that I think is very beautiful and ancient. It sort of speaks of wisdom, the book, doesn't it? Or it can do. But anyway, the oldest text that is the oldest text that we've got, that human beings have got, is in the British Museum, and it's not a Christian text, it's a perfection of wisdom text called the Diamond Sutra. And you can... The British Library, sorry, not the British Museum, thank you. So you can go to the British Library and have a look at the oldest extant text in the world, maybe brought up from the depths of the ocean, guarded by the Nagas, and it's a copy of the Diamond Sutra. How wonderful, I think, that that text is there. And when you see a text like that, you naturally, I think, can venerate it just as an object of it. It becomes something to worship. That impulse of veneration, of reverence, of wanting to worship, then naturally leads to the personification of it. And then you have this glorious figure of Prajnaparamita, who is a bodhisattva in female form, but she's the mother of all the Buddhas. And there's another image of her on this book. On this image, she's actually got 4 arms, not 2. And in one of her upper arms, so she's got 2 arms like that, and then 2 in teaching gesture. And her 2 arms up here, they hold a Vajra. We've heard about a Vajra in earlier talks. There's one on the shrine there. Padma Vajra last week was talking about the Vajra as a lightning thunderbolt, condensed, that pure energy of lightning, condensed and held as a ritual scepter. And she holds a Vajra, which is interesting because a Vajra isn't. It's sort of not like the lotus. The lotus is an image of unfoldment and gentle awakening of our potential, the Vajra breaks through all our resistance. It will break through every obstacle. It's the diamond scepter. It's a diamond thunderbolt. It's as hard as diamond with all the energy of lightning. So it smashes through. Yeah. So she's gentle, and yet she can wield a Vajra. And the perfection of wisdom is like that. You need to have a completely open, pure heart, and then it'll destroy you, yeah? If you let it. And in that destruction is your liberation, is the liberation. So in a way, be careful what you ask for. When you come to the Buddhist Center and you learn about the Dharma, and it's said that particularly actually in the Diamond Sutra, it says you're very, very fortunate to hear the Diamond Sutra or to even encounter the Diamond Sutra, but be careful, because it will bring you down. There's an interview that I read with a Western Buddhist teacher who follows Tibetan Buddhism called Reginald Ray. He's a scholar and a practitioner and a very good writer, and he's written several very good books about the Dharma. And an order member in Sri Ratna called Vishwapani, I remember, interviewed him. He's American, Reggie Ray. And now I'm remembering this interview after many years, so I may have got it very wrong. And I can't do an American accent, but I'll give it a go. And Vishwapani says, look, to Reggie, he says, what if, you've practiced the Tantra for decades, and what effect has it had on you? And Reggie Ray says, a respected teacher, he says, well, it's kind of just destroyed my life. And Vishwapani said, what, like you mean career and things? And he said, yeah, it kind of started with that. And in a way, if you dabble with the perfection of wisdom, you're asking for all your known parameters, all the things that you think you know about your life will be swept away. Yeah? Something more wonderful will open up. What that is, you'll never be able to say, but it will be liberating. But all the things that you think you are and the things that make sense in your life, you'll have to review. Yeah? Really radically review. It will turn everything upside down. You're playing not just with fire, but with dynamite. So you really have to have enough love, respect, and faith to approach this. It's not safe. Yeah? It's not safe. I love that, actually, that Buddhism isn't safe. So Prajnaparamita looks, well, she is very compassionate, and she looks very peaceful and benign, and she's a mother after all. But yes, she holds the Vajra, or she can hold the Vajra, and she holds these texts that are not safe, that will undermine and destroy every egotistical urge. Yeah? Which, if our lives have been built around our egotism, which is what Western consumerist society tells us to do, if our lives have been built around me and what I want, if that's what I've built my life around, and then I really encounter the perfection of wisdom, it will destroy all of that. Yeah? So you have to work up to it gently. But the other thing to say is that reality is always present in every moment. Every moment is pregnant with reality. So it could just be that wisdom arises in you, at least you glimpse something of wisdom without asking for it. And then you better be prepared. Yeah? So it's good to start practicing the metta bhavana seriously, so that there's a heart that can hold whatever wisdom whenever lightning strikes. Yeah? It's almost like if you practice the Dharma with sincerity, then it's like you're putting up a lightning conductor. Yeah. So lightning can strike any time anyway. Whether you have a lightning conductor or not, you might be hit by lightning because it's a natural phenomenon. But if you put a lightning conductor up, you're sort of asking for it. And that's what you're doing with Dharma practice. If you're serious about the attainment of enlightenment, you're putting up a lightning conductor. And then Prajnaparamita might appear. There's much more I was going to talk about, but I haven't really got time, or not very much time. What I perhaps will say is, let's just look at this verse again. Call forth as much as you can of love, of respect, and of faith. Remove the obstructing defilements and clear away all your taints. So it's saying remove all traces of egotism, all the taints of egotism, all our selfishness, all of our greed, and all of our aversion, our pettiness, our jealousies, our hatreds, our resentments, our anger. Remove all of those taints. And then, with a pure heart, you can listen to the perfect wisdom of the gentle Buddhas. So again, here, the Buddhas are very, very gentle. Yeah? Implying again a mother's love, I think. Taught for the weal of the world. So the perfection of wisdom is taught because the world is suffering. There is real suffering everywhere in the world, and that's why the Buddhas teach. That's why Prajnaparamita is teaching. And then you get this kind of punchline for heroic spirits intended. So just when you thought it was going to be gentle and comforting, it might not be quite what you bargained for. It might be much more than you bargained for. I'd really, really recommend this book, Wisdom Beyond Words, if you want to explore the perfection of wisdom texts more thoroughly. Bhante Sangharakshita gives a commentary on them. But I thought what we'd do now is we'd finish by just doing a bit of chanting. So Prajnaparamita has her own mantra, but I thought what we'd chant is the mantra that appears at the end of the Heart Sutra. And we'll chant that, actually we might chant that in call and response 7 times, and then we'll just sit for a moment. And in this mantra, we're evoking the perfection of wisdom in a completely non-conceptual way. The mantra is Gate Gate Paragate Parasangate Bodhiswaha, which means, if you needed to translate it, it would mean gone, gone, gone beyond, gone utterly beyond. Bodhi meaning enlightenment, and Swaha meaning, well, something like hail, or all hail. Yeah? Gone, gone, gone beyond, gone completely beyond. Gone beyond all ways of knowing, all mundane ways of conceiving. Wisdom that goes beyond everything. In Bhante's words, it goes beyond words, wisdom beyond words. That's what we'll be evoking in this mantra.